Welcome to the International Conference on Children and Their Families using the Multiple Indicator Cluster Surveys. My name is Tom Slaymaker. I'm based at UNICEF headquarters in New York, and I'm going to chair this session today. My co-chair is Eva Quintana, who is also a colleague who works on the mixed team at UNICEF headquarters. And we have three speakers for this session. I will introduce them in a minute, but just before I do, a few notes on housekeeping. So this session is being recorded. It will also then be hosted on the Mix website, on the YouTube channel, as well as on the Bristol Poverty Institute YouTube channel. So what that means is by attending, you are consenting to be part of the recording. Please do make sure that you have added your name as you've logged in so that we can see who you are, so that we can monitor who is participating, and so that we know who to call when you're asking your questions. You will be able to ask questions later on, but please note that the chat is disabled, so if you want to ask a question, you need to use the Zoom Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. So we don't have time to take questions after every presentation. So what we will do is we will have three 15-minute presentations, and then we will ask you to type your questions, and then we will try to answer those at the end altogether. Please do be respectful. All of the events at this conference are being monitored, and we will remove anyone whose comments are deemed offensive. So our session for the next hour is on child labour. We have three presentations for you. The first one will be on mother's age at marriage and offspring's involvement in child labour. That will be by Sapuru Obiezi. We have a second one on child labour statistics using the mix by Anna Bulgarine, and a third one on the effects of farming and livestock rearing on child labour in rural Bangladesh by Saki Nakamura, who is online. So hopefully you're in the right session. I'm going to invite up our first speaker, Sapuru. Please come and load your presentation.
So, hello everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I really hate when people say what we can be today saying that. My name is Sapuru Obiezi, and I'm a DPhil student based at the Department of Social Policy and Intervention at the University of Oxford. And I'm actually here to present initial findings as part of the papers of my DPhil, which explores the intergenerational impact of maternal experience of child marriage on different forms of child safety violations among her children. And I have my supervisor here, Dr. William Rodgers, and also I'm co-supervised by Professor Lucy Kluver. So as an introduction, so child marriage basically...
You're not sharing, you can't see that. So can you just...
I'll just go back, I think.
So, to zoom. This one?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Just in case you didn't see my home screen, I'm looking at the maternal experience of child marriage and the impact on children's child labour engagement, basically. So I'll start with just giving a brief overview about child marriage in sub-Saharan Africa. So child marriage is just basically any form of union, whether formal or informal, involving a minor under the age of 18 and another individual, regardless of whether they're minors or adults. So it's rooted in gender inequality, because if you look at the global prevalence of child marriage, it affects girls at rates that are 6 times higher than boys. And of recent, while there has been much progress that has been made in reducing child marriage globally, the burden is gradually shifting to sub-Saharan Africa, according to the latest work on the global trends of child marriage that has shown that by 2030, Sub-Saharan Africa, we have the highest prevalence of child marriage globally, and currently higher than the global average global prevalence of 1 in 5. And you have 1 in 3 girls in Sub-Saharan Africa married before the age of 18. And given also, huge, the projected population growth in Sub-Saharan Africa is also expected to overtake South Asia, that currently has the highest global burden and prevalence of child marriage by 2030, which is when we are aiming to end child marriage. So next slide. So much of the literature on child marriage has examined the impact on the women themselves, and the research is actually very important because it adds to instrumental advocacy to end child marriage. So we have things like increased fertility, which is linked to early childbearing among child brides, higher risk of maternal morbidity and mortality at birth, so reduced chances of facility-based delivery, increased risk of interpersonal violence, and so forth and so on. So aside these health consequences, it's been severally documented that child brides have lower educational attainment because girls are almost always forced to drop out of school to get to be married as child brides, and even if they don't, it's hard to combine being a mother with school engagement or attending school. And also societal economic impacts have been documented. So for example, this work by Green et al. Shows that this leads to an entrenchment of negative gender norms. You have loss of productivity returns at a national level, and then population growth. But of recent, you have the academic literature on child marriage is now expanding to look at the impact on children born to child brides. And much of this evidence focuses on the health and educational consequences. So for instance, this work done by Paul et al. In India has shown that children born to child brides in India at higher risk of anemia and have lower anthropometric scores. Similar findings by Wodon in Uganda. Educational outcomes, also very strong, consistent evidence that children born to child brides are likely to have lower school enrollments, to be over age for grades, poor numeracy and reading skills. And if you look at the hypothesized mechanisms that link child marriage to these outcomes, there is a very strong emphasis on maternal literacy, the ability of a woman to make decisions within her household, and these children outcomes. So, but so far, there hasn't been any research that looks at whether child marriage, well, to the best of my knowledge, whether maternal experience of child marriage can increase child safety violations. So things like, child violence or engagement in child labor and so forth. So for this particular research, I'm focusing on whether maternal experience of child marriage can increase can increase children's engagement in child labor. And of course, as a starting point, it was to develop a conceptual framework, and it was by looking at both determinants and consequences of child marriage, looking at the determinants and consequences of child labor, and trying to see if there were linkages among these two different forms of, I would argue, child victimization, so that child marriage or child labor. And as a starting point is to consider the macro context in which child marriage and child labor occurs, because these are they operate in very complex socioeconomic realities. So things like how public and social policy lead not just to child marriage, but also can affect children, mitigate the impacts of child marriage to children that are born to child brides. Things like the existence of social protection in countries and regions, the role of environmental crises like conflicts and climate. So there's evidence that this increase both child marriage and child labor, or in different literatures. And also the role of sociocultural norms at the community level. So gender norms on child marriage, also gender norms on child labor, for instance, hazardous work, household labor affects girls more than boys, and how the society tolerates both child labor and child marriage practices. So aside this macro context, because I'm looking at maternal experience of child marriage and children's child labor outcomes, then becomes important to focus on intra-household dynamics, so how maternal characteristics or relationships with those within her households would lead to children's outcomes, including child labor. And as a starting point, I find Nalia Kabia's work on women's empowerment, like I'm a fan, if you know her anyway. I found it really very resourceful in thinking about how women's characteristics can lead to children's outcomes. So she talks about women empowerment in the two different dimensions, and why I like this work on conceptualizing women empowerment is also linked to sense capability approach. So in terms of maternal resources, you have things like maternal assets, material, human and social resources, and how that can be converted and then lead and affect children that are under her care. And then maternal agency. So agency basically means the ability of a person to choose and make decisions on decisions that are important to them. You have things like how a woman is able to make a decision on the number of children she wants to have, on contraceptive choices, on intra-household resource allocation, intimate partner violence, actually, health-seeking behavior, financial autonomy, and so on. And then you have maternal achievements, which translates to how both maternal agency and resources link to, or even achievements standalone. It considers things like physical and mental well-being, maternal stress, political participation. So if you think about women being involved in decisions that relate to them, representation in political institutions, maternal literacy, maternal earnings, and life satisfaction. So they are actually, and how these then feed into children's outcomes. So, for instance, there's evidence on how maternal literacy affects maternal decision and household spending affects children's health and nutrition. And you can then start, piecing together how that might also affect child labor in terms of maternal earnings, maternal control of household resources, and so forth. So following the literature review and then this conceptual framework, and just reflecting on the coexistent burden of both child labor and child marriage in sub-Saharan Africa, so we thought there was enough rationale to ask if there was to explore at this point if there was any association between maternal experience of child marriage at the household level and the probability of our children being exposed to harmful work. To see if this varies by the gender of the child and by the type of work, the type of child labor, and then to compare findings across sub-Saharan Africa. For the methods, we used 13 countries from Mix 6, with data available from the 6 in sub-Saharan Africa. So shown on the map: Central African Republic, Chad, Congo, DRC, Gambia, Ghana, and so forth. And just want to shout out to ICOM's Mix, and that made my life a lot easier in terms of cleaning and using this data sets. So the survey spanned from 2017 to 2039, and our study population were biological female caregivers aged 25 to 49 years old, and their children aged 5 to 17, so the age of the women was chosen to overlap with the child labor mixed model that looks at children between 5 to 17. And the independent variable was just child marriage, defined as whether a woman was married before the age of 18 or after. But we also run other regressions using age at marriage, just to have very nuanced findings. I don't present that in this current work on the relationship between maternal age at marriage and the intensity of work. 5 minutes left, okay. So I'm just going to gloss over this very quickly. In terms of methods, we use the ILO definition of child labor, and then, so we use the ILO definition of child labor and developed just one binary variable of whether a woman is, a child is exposed to child labor or not. And then we run survey-weighted binary logistic regression, clustering standard errors at both country and community level. Just because right now we are not yet exploring contextual factors. So here is the preliminary results, just shows the prevalence of child marriage and child labor by country. So you see that the countries with my notes have disappeared. Okay, it's fine. So here's the descriptive analysis. You see that Central African Republic, Chad and Nigeria have the highest prevalence of child marriage. So overall, there's quite very high prevalences of marriage under 18 within this region. Same for child labor, and then intensity of child's work closely matches the prevalence of child labor. And then this graph just shows a three-way bar chart that shows the prevalence of child labor by maternal experience of child marriage, and then we have separate results for each gender. So we've arranged the results for the different countries based on decreasing prevalence of child marriage. And generally, it appears that the prevalence of child marriage is higher among women, children born to childbirth, as you can see in the bars colored green, compared to children born to non-childbirths. And the largest gaps are in Togo, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. The largest gaps in gender, but in the rest of the countries, there doesn't seem to be much gender differentials. And we see like a similar trend in the lowest prevalence countries of child labor. And this is like the initial regression results that we have. So in model 1, it's just a crude unadjusted odds ratio. So the results are significant. You have a 32% higher odds of being engaged in child labor. If you're any form of child labor, we have results for different forms of child labor for the sake of time. In the adjusted regressions, where you control for polygamous relationship and urban residence, maternal age, the coefficients are still significant. And then when you add in hypothesized pathways like whether maternal literacy or household wealth, there's like a strong evidence that those are transmission mechanisms. And here I also have results by country just to see how the findings vary within several countries. They look like they're on the right side. When you adjust, the coefficients are still statistically significant. But then for many of the countries, so this overall at the bottom, but for many of the countries, you'd explain most of the effects by adding, incorporating those factors. Just to also highlight in Chad, whilst the unadjusted crude ratios is not significant, when you account for maternal literacy and income, it becomes like really very significant, which shows that there's something happening in Chad, and I'm intending to explore that. So it's a discussion. So far, we found significant relationship between maternal experience of child marriage and child labor, which persists in some countries even after we control for individual and household level covariates, and for some hypothesized mechanisms. There's market heterogeneity, and there's also strong evidence that maternal human capital might mediate this. A limitation is that, and this is something I'm particularly interested in because this was informed by my own lived experiences, that when you think about domestic chores and child marriage and poverty, a lot of these girls live outside their homes, and the mixed child labor model is restricted to children within their households. So this is likely an underestimate of the real relationship between child marriage and child labor. And then, of course, this is cross-sectional data, and the analysis as it is, we can use it to inference causality. In conclusion, to our knowledge, the first paper to explore the link between maternal experience of child labor and children's engagement, maternal experience of child marriage and children's engagement in child labor outcomes, and also highlights the importance of a holistic approach to child protection efforts in countries where you have coexistent high burdens of child safety violations. And so we plan for the research to investigate the contextual and household mechanisms because I control for household wealth. For instance, there's a potential mechanism when you look at child marriage as a determinant of earnings and women's contribution to household money, and then potentially longitudinal analysis. So that is it. Then thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your comments.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very interesting hypothesis and some interesting findings. And also thank you for keeping precisely to time. Our next presentation, if I can just bring it up, is going to be from Anna. Here she comes, Anna Baldwin.
Well, thank you. Nice to see people again. I presented yesterday, so again, my name is Anna, and today I'm presenting on behalf of different co-authors, Deborah Levison and Deb DeGraff, both at, Deborah Levison's at the University of Minnesota, and Deb DeGraff is at Bowdoin University. Today, I'll be talking about child labor statistics that we have estimated using mix, specifically the IPPMS mix. In this talk, I am taking the position that work is fundamental to being human and is particularly fundamental for children and adolescents, and that under reasonable conditions, work is beneficial to kids. Now, the big topic here is what is reasonable and what is problematic. So the distinction in child labor that I'm going to be talking about today is really thinking about hazards versus harms. Hazards are hazardous condition that can lead to harms, and harms being the actual harm itself. So an example here of work that we all do every day is cooking. Cooking is something that most people do every day, including children and adolescents. And children and adolescents participating in cooking for their household can be really beneficial. They're learning how to care for themselves, they're providing for themselves, and under reasonable conditions, being supervised, making sure that the area is ventilated, making sure that the child is appropriately using a knife that's not too sharp, but sharp enough to do what it needs to. Those can all be reasonably beneficial for the child learning good skills. In the cooking example, a hazard would be the potential of a grease splatter or cutting themselves with a knife, where that harm is the actual harm that has occurred, either the cut or the burn, the grease burn. In this talk, we're going to be using the Mix 6 surveys, looking at the child work, as I'm assuming most people in this session are looking at. We're going to be looking at over 40 different countries, creating estimates that will represent over 300 million 5 to 17-year-olds. Once again, pitch for IPPMS. We have produced harmonization for over 900 variables, 90 countries, 200 samples, and 1,000 data sets. What we have produced harmonization for at IPPMS represents about 70 to 80% of the standard Mix 6 questions, and we have produced harmonization when possible for Mix 3, 4, 5, and 6. This is in partnership with UNICEF. I can go into more details for anybody who didn't hear the pitch yesterday, but basically IPPMS specializes in harmonization, and we produce syntax that can generate harmonized data sets, and that's what we're using in this study. One of the things about pooling, we have had a lot of conversations about how pooling multiple samples or multiple countries can be really powerful in research, but also a little bit problematic. And this is an example and an exercise of how we're thinking about pooling and the considerations that we've had to take in this project to properly consider weighting when pooling across samples. The first thing that we had to take into account was the UNICEF supplied internal weights for each sample that account for the selection of the household and the 5 to 17-year-olds that are specific to the individual. We also generated country-specific weights that account for different population sizes and different sample sizes, so that in our pooled estimates, larger countries are accounting for larger proportions of the estimates that are take into account the sample size of the particular mix. We have constructed these country-specific estimate, or the weights by subpopulations. So I'll be talking a lot about 3 different age categories of the kids, girls and boys, and urban and rural, and each of those subpopulations has its own constructed weight within the country to make sure that we are actually weighting among the population of a particular country. And then we have applied all of these different types of weights. This presentation today is both a demonstration of what we've done, but also very much a call for more guidance from UNICEF on how should researchers go about pooling multiple countries. It's clear from presentations in this conference that this is something that a lot of people are doing. We all think we're doing it right, but there is a lack of really explicit guidance on how we should be thinking about pooling and balancing sample sizes, how to use the different weights provided, specifically for the adolescent module, because there's different weights provided depending on the 5 to 17-year-old versus the household with the 5 to 17-year-old. So it gets a little confusing. I really do want to talk about that more with everyone, but that's the context in which I'm going to present today. The different dimensions of child work, as most people who are in this session are familiar with, we're going to look at labor force work, fetching water and firewood, different types of household chores, and we are considering children participating if they do at least 1 hour in the last 7 days. When thinking about child labor and child work, it's also important to think about how people might have been answering questions about child work and child labor. It's been shown in literature that the more questions about different activities and different types of work, the more people respond positively to one of those activities, and thus the amount of kids participating in those activities does increase. The data reported in mix is proxy reported, which might not always be accurate when thinking about work that might be overlooked by certain subpopulations. And in the context of child labor being something that's seen as being negative or illegal, there could be stigma in underreporting, specifically with different types of work. The labor force categories in mix are subsistence agriculture, family or business work, selling or producing things for sale, and other types of income generating. So we've combined these together to create our participation in labor force work. And the chore categories, we've chosen to include the water and firewood variables in with chores, in addition to the cooking, cleaning, laundry, childcare, elder care, and other types of household tasks. So these are standard from the mix. Okay, so we are approaching the results section, and I'm going to walk through each of these graphics a little bit slowly, just because we have produced estimates, like I said, for a bunch of different types of labor and a bunch of different subpopulations, and all of these estimates have multiple dimensions that don't always graphically reproduce in clear ways. So in this particular figure, you can see the rural boys, rural girls, and urban girls are grouped into categories, with the top line of each category referring to the older kids, the 15 to 17-year-olds, the middle lines referring to the middle kids, the 10 to 14-year-olds, and the youngest kids, the 5 to 9-year-olds. And so those age categories are going to remain consistent over all of the graphs I'm going to show. They're going to appear in different ways in the different graphic representations. So the estimates here are looking at kids who are participating in no type of labor force work or chore work, only labor force, only chore, or both. And overall, what we're trying to do with this study is look at trends and to try to understand more about what types of combinations of subpopulations of kids are participating or not. So what we can point out here is that overall, the younger kids, the bottom line in each, are less likely to be participating in any labor force work or chore work, the gray bars, and that girls, these bottom two graphs, are more likely to be participating really heavily in the chore category, but also the chore and the labor force work, as opposed to the boys. The top two graphs with the darker color there have a higher proportion of kids, boy kids, participating in labor force work. Another way to visualize the estimates, this is breaking down the different types of labor force work. The big takeaway here is that the younger boys, the blue lines, are overall participating in labor force work at a lower percentage than the older boys and the medium-aged boys. And there is a little bit of variation across the different types of labor force work. Now the next slide I'm going to show is girls, and it's going to be the same access in the same categories and the same age categories. So just watch for the transition, because the difference is girls participate in labor force at a lower rate than, at a lower percentage than boys. Okay, so moving on to hazards. We're going to shift denominators a little bit here, where now we're going to only be looking at kids who are actually participating in labor force work, as was brought up in the last presentation. We really only have hazard information on labor force work, not domestic work or chore work, and so this is a bit of a gap. But the underlying denominator, or the universe here, is kids who are participating in labor force work for at least 1 hour in the last 7 days, the reference period. The different types of hazard categories in mix are shown here, probably quite familiar to most people in this room. This is our estimates for the different types of hazardous work. The top line is the older kids of combined gender. The middle line is the middle-aged kids, and the youngest kids are in blue. And as you can see, for all kids who are participating in labor force work, the older kids are more likely to be experiencing hazardous work. It's probably quite predictable. But there are some different types of hazards that are more common for all age kids. This graph is showing the percentage of kids who are working, who report any of those hazardous conditions. And you can see that overall the numbers of kids who are working, many of them are experiencing at least one of those hazardous conditions. Overall, the takeaway here is that the rural boys, these the blue line, in all of the age categories, so older at the top, middle, and younger at the bottom, the rural boys tend to experience more, tend to have more hazardous work than comparably aged kids in urban areas and girls. But also the yellow line are the rural girls of each of the age categories, are also a little bit higher than the urban girls in each situation. So once again, I'm going to show pretty much this exact same figure, but I'm going to add on the element of school enrollment. So the oldest kids are going to stay on top, the middle kids are going to stay in the middle, and the younger kids are going to stay at the bottom. So it's going to be the same setup. Okay, so here, like I said, I've just added the component of school enrollment, where the solid bars represent the percentage of kids who are working, who are experiencing at least one of the hazards, and the dashed lines are the kids who are enrolled in school. The big takeaway here is that kids who are not enrolled in school have a higher percentage of working in a hazard with one of the hazards than kids who are enrolled in school across all subpopulations, the age categories, the urban and rural, and the girls and boys. Just to wrap up in conclusion, because I see I have 1 minute left, participation in hours do increase with age. I didn't show the hours results, but we have worked through those. Girls do have lower labor force participation than boys, also fewer hours than boys. And among the hazardous working conditions, almost 60%, 58% of working kids do report having working in at least one of the hazardous conditions, with the rural boys, especially in the medium and the older ages, having the highest percentage. Kids who are enrolled in school are less likely to be involved in hazardous working conditions, and enrollment is most protective for the urban boys. And in conclusion, like I said, this was very much an exercise in trying to figure out how to present estimation among a weighted sample. We have produced country-specific estimates, but as you can see, we're already struggling to demonstrate all of the different subpopulations, let alone trying to demonstrate them all by country, adding just another element there. And really what we're looking at here is to further the nuance of child labor and thinking about the distinction between reasonable child labor and beneficial child labor versus looking at some of the hazardous types of child labor and trying to reassess what types of statistics that we have, what types of estimations we can produce, and really looking at how we can further the discussion about beneficial and hazardous work. And so I'm here to talk about IPUMs for the next day. Please come and talk to me. Thanks.
I'll turn over now to Saki.
Good morning, everyone. I am Saki Nakamura from Kobe University in Japan, and my co-author is Professor Ishida. Our research topic is the effects of farming and livestock rearing on child labor in rural Bangladesh. Today, I'd like to talk about the backgrounds of this problem and our estimation results. Now let's begin with checking the definition of child labor. International Labour Organization defines child labor with 2 points. First is child labor is work that is mentally, physically, socially, or morally dangerous and harmful to children. And second, child labor is the work that interferes with their schooling. And also there is minimum age convention for labor. This convention prohibits children who are less than 15 years old from working. So for this research, we define child labor as the work which is done by less than 15 years old. Now let me introduce the current situation of child labor. As you can see on the left side, in 2020, about 160 million children are engaged in child labor around the world. And also this pie graph shows many of them work within their own family unit or work in agricultural sector. As you know, the child labor has a lot of negative impacts on children's health, education, and also society. This is because the eradication of child labor is aimed for globally by IPEC and SDGs number 8. Now let's look into the factors of child labor. To eradicate child labor, we should know the factors of child labor. So until now, many researchers have studied. We can divide us in 3 factors, 3 levels: global level, macro level, and micro level. First, at global level, globalization and economic shock would be factors. And second, at macro level, market imperfection would be a factor. For example, if labor market is imperfect, children are more likely to be forced to work because parents want to avoid a moral hazard by hiring other people. And also because of failure to enforce laws and social security systems, the demand for child labor will increase because their labor cost is cheaper than others. And third, at micro level, there are 7 categories. More girls and older children tend to work. And education of both children and parents have negative impacts on child labor. And also employment status of parents is also related to child labor. And finally, the attributes of household are also key factors for child labor, such as economic status, living area, number of household members, and also capital endowment. The effect of household income is obvious, but the effect of capital holding is still controversial. So we'd like to clarify the effect of capital holding in this research. The reason for this controversy is West paradox. Many researchers stated that the main cause of child labor is poverty. However, some researchers claim that child labor would increase by land holding, which is assumed that increase household income. So like this, whether there is a wealth paradox or not is still under the discussion. So we like to clarify the existence of wealth paradox in this research as well. And many researchers explain this paradox with income effect and substitution effect. Now let me explain the relationship between children's working hours and farm size. But before that, I will explain what income effect and substitution effect are. Income effect is the effect which decreases child labor. If farm size is getting bigger, their household income will increase. So then parents can invest to their children's education more and more, and then child labor will decrease. On the other hand, the substitution effect is the effect which increases child labor. If farm size is getting bigger, the demand and productivity of labor will increase, and then child labor will increase at the same time. And especially when labor market is imperfect or children inherit their farms, the substitution effect would become stronger. There are two hypotheses to describe the relationship between children's working hours and farm size. First is inverted U-shaped curve. Until farm size reaches to K, substitution effect is larger than income effect, and then their working hours will increase. After that, the income effect becomes larger than substitution effect, and then their working hours will decrease. So we can get the inverted U-shaped curve like this. Second is S-shaped curve theory. Until the farm size leads to Ka, income effect is larger than substitution effect, and then their working hours will increase. When the farm size is in the middle of Ka and Kb, substitution effect is larger than income effect, and then their working hours will increase. And after that, income effect becomes larger than substitution effect again, and then their working hours will decrease. So based on these assumptions, we can get a shaped curve like this. So their working hours will increase in the middle. Based on these previous studies, we like to clarify the effect of capital holding in this research. Especially, we like to focus on the relationship between children's working hours and farm size, and also the relationship between children's working hours and livestock, because livestock is also an important source of income for developing countries. However, no researchers studied the effect of livestock, so we like to add the livestock in this research. Now let's move on to our research. I use the data of mix 6 in Bangladesh, and we conducted Tobit model to see the effect. Dependent variable is working hours of children. This is only for economic activities. And independent variables are the farm size and livestock. We use agricultural land size and squared one for farm size, and we used TLU, which is tropical livestock unit, for livestock. We calculated TLU based on these numbers. Here is the estimation result. As you can see, older children tend to work longer compared to younger children. Actually, we couldn't find a significant effect of gender, but if children are boys and 11 years old or more, they would be work longer. And also the mother's education level has a negative impact on their working hours as well. In terms of land and livestock, we couldn't find a significant effect of land, but we could find a significant effect of livestock, which can be represented by inverted U-shaped curve. To discuss these results, the reason why we couldn't find the relationship between working hours of children and farm size is that farming is a seasonal work. So we need more research to make sure the differences between farming seasons and off-seasons. On the other hand, livestock is not affected by seasons, so we could get a good result. To see this inverted U-shaped curve more concretely, the top point of this curve is when TLU is 10. TLU is 10 means the very large scale of livestock. For example, we need 20 of cows or we need 50 of pigs to reach to 10. So only few households can exceed that top point. So we can say normally their working hours will increase because of livestock. Because livestock is more profitable and needs more care compared to farming, so the substitution effect would be easy to be large. And then their working hours increase more easily. And lastly, for future research, we like to estimate the effect in case of economic activities and in case of household chore at the same time. And also we like to add other data, which is agriculture census, to make regional DAWI in more detail. And then we hope we can see the effect of farm size and livestock at each level, which is regional level and individual level. And here are some references. That's all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Saki, for an excellent presentation. Very clear. So we're now going to use the rest of our time for a discussion and a Q&A. And I'd like to just go to any questions online first. Have we received any questions? No? Okay, so maybe we can open up to the room. 3 very interesting presentations with some linkages across them. I think this question of using a cross-section to look at intergenerational effects is very interesting. Anna raised this question of providing more guidance on how to use weights for consistency in this analysis of large pooled samples. And then Saki's been highlighting these different effects of farm size and livestock, and I wonder what might be the implications for policy of understanding these relationships. Those are the questions going through my mind. Do you have any questions for our presenters? Yes, at the back. I'm going to bring the microphone to you so that you can be heard online. So please speak clearly. And people online, please type your questions in the Q&A.
Thank you very much. Quick question to Sopru about the child marriage and maternal attributes there. I wrote down a question about the difference between in partner's age. I noticed you had partner's age and education there, but in your regression you didn't report anything. Does partner's age, does the man matter in terms of the age gap between husbands and wives in these countries, and how so?
Great question. Please hold that one, Saburu. I'm going to go to Bo.
Yeah, mine is more, I don't know, you cannot see me now. I work with the mixed team and I design our questionnaires. I spend a long time doing that. And right now, actually, we are in the process of redesigning the child labor module to become a lot bigger, a lot more complex. It's a terrible undertaking, but it's a necessary undertaking because we need the detail to capture the SDG and to capture the definitions of what is employment according to ILO, etc. It's a very complex remodeling that we have to do. However, what I wanted to mention is what you have seen, and it really goes for all presentations, what you have seen in your analysis, things that you think that we should be paying special attention to now in that redesign, because now is the design for the next 10, 15 years. So I'm listening very closely to what you have said in your presentations and what we need to do in the questionnaires. And finally, when it comes to agricultural land and livestock, I'm really excited to see this data being put to use. And I understand from what you're saying that we need to be paying much more attention to this as part of the data collection, because it's a little bit of a side product. It is not collected for the purpose of knowing whether someone has 50 chickens or 70 chickens, but it's to inform our wealth index calculations. So we are not really super particular with the detail here, but I'm really happy to see it put to use. Thank you.
When you have the microphone, would you like to respond to Anna's challenge about whether there is sufficient guidance on how to use those?
No. It's on the list of things that we ought to be doing, but we have some of it half-baked, like we have probably a bunch of things that we really be putting guidance up on, but yeah, it's just stuck with a couple of people who have to do it and never get around to producing the guidance. There's a mental note, and I will be very happy to receive an email, either through Ivana or directly to me. Cheers.
Okay, but one thing we do like to see is when researchers are very transparent about how they've used the weights. Yes. That's excellent.
Thank you. My question is to Sapuru. I thought it was a really interesting question, and a lot of other questions come to mind, like time use, parental employment, and stuff like that. But those aren't things that are available in the data, unfortunately. But I was wondering as well about what other things might affect child labor in the family, and I wonder about birth order, because it's usually the oldest kids who are bearing a lot of the burden as well, and also whether or not there's multiple children in the home. And I'm assuming since you're doing sub-Saharan Africa, there's usually multiple parities, right? So I'm wondering about that effect as well.
Okay, and I'm going to take one more from the back of the room, and then I'm going to come back to our presenters. Esther.
Yeah, thank you for the 3 interesting presentations. I have a question about the use of wealth indicators. So that might be interesting. I don't know if Ipsum has some guidance on that. And I also saw that it was used in the first presentation. You use like quintiles, which I think could be a really good way if you're comparing also across countries. So if there are any thoughts on that, because I've just in the literature seen different ways of using wealth scores, because they're also calculated using different assets.
Okay, and Eva, one question from you. It's for you, or it's from you? From you.
Yeah, no, this is to Anna, and I understand maybe this was not the objective of your study, but I was wondering, since you've done this, amazing work of pulling all this data together, if you had also considered looking at, to have a more complete picture of child labor, looking at the household chores aspect. And I know that there's, the focus was the hazardous conditions, but number of hours involved in household chores. I know it can lead, maybe we cannot define that as a hazard, but can lead to harm in many ways. So yeah, and it would just also highlight the inequalities, the gender inequalities in work participation, right? Where then females participate at much higher rates than boys in this kind of work. Yeah.
One more question. Pamela.
Thank you very much. I think my question will go to the 2 of you, Sapuru and Anna. So what I want to also find out is whether you consider the relationship of the child to the household. Because sometimes, based on the relationship, if the child is not a biological child of the household head or the mother, he or she might have more work to do than, the original children. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. So some good questions, some general questions, and then some specific questions for Anna and Sapuru. And I'd like all of the presenters also to reflect on Bo's question about, things that you like or don't like about the existing questions and module that you'd like to be taken into account with the revisions. So maybe I can go to Sapuru first, and then to Anna, and then to Saki, who is still online.
So I'll start with Shelley's question about partner age. So I should have taken that out actually, but it's just basically the next stage of the project. So we're trying to explain the pathway. So partner age. Oh, sorry. So in thinking about so the empowerment aspect, the ability of a woman to make decisions on resource allocation, we thought partner age, experience of domestic violence could be good proxies of measurement of empowerment. So right now, just pretend to say it. It's just basically in the next stage of the project. There's also a question about bed order. Did I include bed order there? I did, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Somewhere in my so I do control for bed order because you would expect that firstborn children would be more inclined to be child laborers. Then there was a question about comparing across wealth quintile. So I'm actually struggling with using wealth in my regression analysis at the moment, just because when I think about child marriage, I think it would be it will be overlooking the mechanism through which child marriage affects children's outcome if I control for wealth. I personally believe there is a significant pathway, and which is why in the next phase of my analysis I'm thinking of using instrumental variables, but I'm currently struggling with what instrument I can use to control for so the endogeneity of poverty. So if anyone has ever done any work, if anyone has done work on instrumenting for child marriages and mix, I would really appreciate your help here, because usually in the DHS you would use menarche, but it's what most people would use, but it's not currently in mix, and I haven't been able to find so far a good substitute for it. And then for the relationship of the child to the mother, I'm glad you asked that question, and I wish my supervisor was here because I had to defend that. So for this analysis, I limit the analysis to biological caregivers, because coming from the context, I understand that because child marriage is somewhat frowned upon, so a woman could mask their relationship with a child and say, well, I'm a biological caregiver of the child. Wow, they are not. So this analysis is restricted to only biological caregivers of children, also considering the lot of children who are engaged in domestic household chores and living outside their households. Yeah, thank you.
Age of anarchy.
Age of anarchy. Oh, great.
Suggestion.
All right. So, Ava, yes, we've produced all the estimates for chores, hours of labor, labor force activity. We have so many estimates that we aren't sure how to present them. It's sort of, we've created a database of estimates now, and so we are kind of working on analyzing all of those estimates. So hopefully we'll figure out some sort of way of reporting what we're finding, and then also making them available in some sort of platform so that others can use and access. Esther, about wealth, one of the elements of weights that we are considering is the categorizing by World Bank when we're thinking about constructing weights using the UN population data, constructing an additional set of subpopulation or UN weights by World Bank income groups, and then also regions, just in case anybody was wondering about that. But it sort of ends up being the same problem where we just are producing more estimates and have yet to sort of figure out how can we analyze them and how can we then present them. So we're considering how to think about wealth, not in the wealth quintile way that you're probably asking about, but in sort of a more abstract way. Pamela's question on child relationship to the head of household, we're not doing that in this specific analysis, but I have actually worked on some problems or some questions with other colleagues as we're exploring the biological child. The work that I did yesterday on orphan status, and orphans is a big factor in how to think about kids who are living with non-biological parents or one biological parent. So not in this presentation, but definitely in some of the other work that I've done. And Bo, I will try not to abuse that open invitation for an email, but you will definitely be hearing from me. Wonderful.
Okay. Okay, Bo's looking forward to that email. Yes, and pooled estimates by wealth is probably the most complex and controversial. I want to turn to Saki. Saki, the other presenters looked at multiple countries. You looked at Bangladesh in a lot of detail. And I wondered if you had any final reflections. I don't know if you could hear the questions in the room. But it's interesting that some of the other presenters found bigger effects by gender than you found. You found the same effects by age. Or if you had any reflections on how easy or difficult it is to work with the mixed data on child labour. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. I think we can get the same effect like gender and age, as I said, but actually for genders it's very controversial. Like there is a gender law, like girls tend to work in household and boys tend to work in economic activities. So for future research, I like to see those differences by gender as well. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to all of our presenters. This is all I think we have time for in this session. But please feel free to continue the conversation over lunch. Thank you very much.